Baruch Hashem. All right. Well, we're going to be talking about the resurrection today. I'm going to talk about resurrection hope. I really feel that we are entering into the season of Pesach, but to me, the whole focus of our life is got to be empowered by the resurrection hope. And this is a special focus for me, especially as I think about us preparing for Pesach. And I'm just going to talk about that tonight. I based this message on a message that I called the audacity of resurrection hope, and it's really a message to take us both through Passover and to the purpose and point of Passover. And I have my heart really set on the resurrection hope, and I hope you do too. The greatest challenge for us as believers is to know that we are not worthy. We are not worthy of all the grace that God has poured into our lives. And we really will never be worthy. It's not about making ourselves worthy. And it's not about what we do. It can't be about what we accomplished or what we achieve. It's the power of grace. To me, the essence of our resurrection hope, your hope, is in what Yeshua has done for us. Passover sends us on a journey, and we are going to talk about Passover in the weeks to come. I mean, Passover is where we're headed right now as as the time of Passover approaches. Really, I mean, it's amazing. By the end of this month, we will be celebrating Passover. And Passover sends us on this amazing journey to a new relationship with God. That's what Passover is about. Beginning with the step of faith through blood-covered doors. This amazing truths, which we have talked about as we walk through the book of Exodus, we are taking a step of faith. This is where Israel began. We are going to come to another challenging moment as we talk about the parasha this week. And I'm going to put it into the context of doubt and faith. But the truth is, Israel began with a step of faith through blood-covered doors, through the power of God's grace over death. And this journey has a destination, of course. It is going to draw us to Sinai. One of the fascinating things, though, is that Sinai looks like it's the destination of Israel. But the real purpose from the beginning was not for God to simply tell us, I am the Lord thy God, the God who calls us to worship him. His real purpose from the beginning was relationship. And the fascinating thing, I've been studying Midrash this past week. And the fascinating thing is the great sages of the Torah, they often point out that the moment that Israel truly sees God is the moment at the Red Sea, where what they call really the beauty of God emerges. And so we are on a journey which will lead to this critical moment of covenant. But it's not simply because God wants to get us into a covenant relationship, but rather he wants us to enter into a heart relationship with him. And that heart relationship with him is what the whole journey is about. And when Moses first receives his calling, he says, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" And God said, "I will be with you." And that is the essence of the heart relationship, isn't it? I will be with you. And this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you've brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. He says to him, I will be with you, and I will bring you through this whole experience until you come back here. God is essentially saying to him, look, this looks to you like an enormous step, an enormous commitment. But take this step with me. I will be with you, and I will bring you back here. It's an assurance that the story of our relationship will come through and come to pass with a place of beginning, and not just a place of ending, but a place of resolution, a place where you'll begin to see all that I have purposed for you. So God sets us free from Egypt, but it is not freedom for freedom's sake. He brings us forth, as it were, not simply because he's a God of justice or a God of righteousness. He brings us forth because he is fulfilling his promises to Abraham. And there is a larger sense that what God began with the first person who began the first step is now living on in the lives of Israel as they take their step. Think about your own life for a moment. I certainly do think about mine. I know that at different times you've taken steps and they were tough. Maybe it was a decision to leave what you had behind. Maybe it was a step to make a move. Maybe it was the step to enter a relationship. In each point, you looked back to where God had led you, and then you looked forward. This is the point, is we need to understand there are depths and purposes in your life which you may not yet see. Israel did not yet really fully comprehend all that God had promised to Abraham. But when God brought them to Sinai, it was a fulfillment to promises which they had not been a part of. And yet he was going to fulfill even through bringing them through a blood-covered door, saving them through death, and then carrying them through the Red Sea, even while Pharaoh was in pursuit. So I'm inviting you to think about your own steps. Think about those your steps of faith. And also, as you move forward, as we move forward towards Passover, I want you to think about where God is leading you. Where is God leading you from here? It's a fascinating thing, of course. This journey should have been a 49-day journey, but it was not. Some of us know what it's like. We think we're on a certain track. We are convinced God's going to carry me through. It's just, the Israelis have a phrase, chick-chuck. It'll just go, ABC, it'll be done. And then you discover what it's really going to cost you. I look back at some of the toughest decisions that I've made, some of the toughest doors I've had to go through. Many years ago, I was on the verge of making a decision to go to school in a certain direction. And I met a very famous, outstanding Messianic Jewish scholar. They were called Hebrew Christians back then. And I met this great scholar, and I told him I was about to make a decision to go through in a certain direction. I wasn't positive about it. I was hesitant. I didn't feel necessarily that this is where God was leading me, but it seemed to be the right thing to do. And I remember this very distinguished gentleman, and Mario, you talk about having a Spanish accent. This gentleman, he still had the remnants of his Polish accent. Ruth, you may remember him, Dr. Jakob Yach. And he had a bit of a Polish accent. And he looked at me and he shook his head. No, he didn't think that was a very good decision at all. And then he pointed me in a completely different direction. And he said, do you know this school? And I knew the school very well. Do you know that school? Go there. They'll take care of you. It was a word I took seriously. At that very afternoon, I crossed the campus. I went in through the doors. I found myself welcomed, received, and it made all the difference. It made all the difference. God knows where you're going. He knows how to get you there. It's not always the journey you expected, but God is with you. He will carry you through. Early on a Sunday morning in the temple, on the very first day of the week after Pesach, Israel begins a process in the courts of in the courts of Israel, which are the courts of offering before the altar. They bring the first grain offering of the year. They actually had a very special field just outside Jerusalem where they sowed they sowed barley for the very first harvest of the year. It was a very sparse crop, by the way, but nevertheless, it was a crop that they brought into the courts where they normally did offerings, and they brought it in very early. Now, I should tell you that when they started the very first offerings early in the day, this altar was never allowed. It was never allowed to go out. The altar always had warm coals in it, but very, very early in the morning, for the first sacrifice, they would stir the stir the coals, and then they would relight the fire on the altar. But this is not where they were concerned about bringing this first offering. This offering was an offering that was called the Bikurim, and the Bikurim really was the offering of a special offering, or olive oil and incense. And then they took essentially the first crop, the very first crop, as I said, which the priests had just outside Jerusalem, and they began to celebrate on the first day of what eventually will be counted down to the feast of Shavuot. So Bikurim begins the wave offerings in the temple. Here we read about it in Leviticus 23. Shall count for yourselves from the day after the Shabbat, from the day when you bring the omer of the wave offering, 7 Shabbats. See, this is how we count 50 days. And this is really the 50 days between Israel's leaving Egypt and arriving at Sinai. That's what this is about. But, of course, for us, these 50 days mean something very else. So it's really 49 days. Means something else. Because away from the temple, on the very same day as they were bringing up the Bikurim, the first fruits, there was a tomb being guarded by Roman soldiers, a tomb sealed shut and under guard because of the person who had been sealed inside, a person who had been accused of conspiring against Rome, a rabbi who had a powerful hold on the people. And they were concerned because they had heard rumors concerning that he might rise on the third day. They wanted to make sure that no one would create suspicions about this body. This was that Yeshua Notzri. And we read in Matthew 28 of surprising events at the tomb. The guards at the tomb experience an earthquake. A terrible angelic being descends from the sky like lightning, rolls away the stone, and the guards are struck lifeless. And when they wake hours later, they look inside and they find the tomb empty, and they run off. Their lives are at stake. They run off. They don't know what to do. And just before dawn, we find out that Miriam of Magdala had arrived in order to tend the tomb, and she had been concerned because, of course, she couldn't do so on Shabbat, but on this day, the first day after is the first hours really after Shabbat, when a woman could walk freely in the streets. On this day, she's really in the height of mourning, and then other women arrive. She's 2 others at least, and they're shocked also to find the stone rolled away from the tomb. One of them creeps inside, and the story is that they see an angel there. And of course, when they had arrived originally, that had been their concern. How were they going to deal with the stone? But then Miriam has a certain encounter later, but the first thing that happens is they look and they see a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side of the tomb, and they are alive. And then the Matthew and Luke both say that the women, looking at this, rush off. They return back to the place where the rest of the disciples are, where the disciples are staying in Jerusalem. Prior to Pesach, they had been staying in Bet Ani, that is around the Mount of Olives on the other side of the mount. But now they were in Jerusalem, and they run to tell the Talmidim, the other disciples, what had gone on. John says that he and Peter, immediately hearing that there was something that had happened at the tomb, rushed off to see what had happened. They were followed there, according to Yochanan, by Mary Magdalene. Two men go inside. Now, it's a brand new tomb. Please make sure that by the way, that your microphone is muted. It's a brand new tomb. There's nothing else in the tomb. Normally, a tomb is created in such a way that there will be ossuaries on the shelving of the tomb. But in this tomb, there is nothing else. It's a brand new tomb. Yosef of Arimathea has donated this brand new tomb, so there's nothing else in there. They go inside, they find no body, but all they find is the collapsed remains of bandages. The cover for the face was not collapsed, as they noticed, but it was rolled up. And this is kind of astounding. Now, there is not simply an issue of the body, but this body is not just wrapped in bandages. It is wrapped in spices and bandages. So the body is wrapped, but there's a lot of spices that have been wrapped up with him. Some have estimated as much as 100 pounds of spices could have been wrapped around the body. A lot of spices. So the entire this entire setting, which is something like a kind of a just what else to say? Not kind of like a low table or a shelf inside the tomb where they laid the body and etc. The bandages have just collapsed, and the interesting thing is that, and many of us know this, you have that kind of stiff linen that they must have put over the face, and they covered the face obviously with this stiff kind of linen for some kind, but it may have originally been rolled. Who knows that? But somehow it hadn't collapsed. It was just kind of rolled up. Some think it was folded up, but this translation says it was rolled up. And then they come back, and the next thing that we see is Yeshua appearing in the midst of the Talmidim. And this is after they have become aware that the Romans are and this, there's knowledge that something has happened. The story in Luke 24 really shows us the disciples huddled together, fearing that there might be some kind of repercussions, that somebody might come looking for them because of what has happened at the tomb. And the appearance of Yeshua is through a locked door. And it says they were talking about it. They're talking about the events. They're talking about what the women see. Miriam, who has seen Yeshua, had spoken to him. All those things have happened. Kepha saying, I saw him. Yohanan believing he is risen. They're talking about it. I'm sure that they were talking about what has happened. They're not sure what has happened. And there's suddenly he's standing there. I mean, the door's locked. Imagine most of you are in a place where you've got a locked door between you and and the rest of the world. If somebody comes into the room right now, that's that's going to be a pretty shocking event. He's standing among them, and they thought they were seeing a ghost. Well, the first thing he says is Shalom Aleichem, according to Yochanan, but Luke says, "Why are you so upset?" It's not even Mani Shma. How are you doing? It's like, oh God, I know how you're. Oh, why are you so upset? Why are those doubts swelling up inside? Look, it's me. Look at my hands and my feet. It's me. Touch me. Ghost doesn't have flesh and bones. So you can see, I do. And as he said this, he showed them his hands and his feet. Then we know Thomas was not there. He refuses a week later. He refuses to believe. And a week later, we know Yeshua comes again. And Thomas, who refused to believe, is told, go ahead, put your finger in my side. See if it isn't me. The doubts of Thomas also reflect our doubts too. The doors were locked. Yeshua came, stood among them, and he said, Shalom Aleichem. And then, put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out your hand. Put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe. And Thomas said to him, my Lord, my God. That's the moment. Tell you, I've spent so many times contemplating what it means to doubt, to question. There was a certain time when it seemed to me I really wrestled with this. And then I came back to this story. I saw myself in the eyes and in the heart of Thomas. I saw myself. And I realized the reality of Yeshua that had been in my life. The reality that I had seen not only transform my life, but transform others who trusted him. And that was the moment I began to say, I am another Thomas. But look what Yeshua says to him. He doesn't blame him. He says, because you have seen, you believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. And that's where many of us have had to stand. We haven't seen, but we've come to believe. The last words that Yeshua Seder confirmed for us, they gave us this comfort. They gave us words of comfort to guide us for the times like this. Trust in God. Trust in me. In my Father's house are many places. I'm going there to prepare a place for you. Since I am going and preparing a place for you, I will return to take you with me, so that where I am, you may be also. This is the comfort he gives. Now, they all want to question him. And he says, are you asking each other about this? A little while and you'll no longer see me. And again, in a little while you will see me. Amen. So be it. I tell you, you will weep and mourn. The world will celebrate. You will be filled with sorrow. but your sorrow will turn to joy. I will see you again, and your heart will rejoice. No one will take your joy away from you. How many challenges and obstacles have stood in the way of our faith? We've worked through them. Sometimes we've walked through valleys of the shadow. I'll never forget how Elaine Zeidman described the loss of her father and how the family's mourning and grief for the one who had been the crowning visionary of their ministry for so many decades was now gone. And privately, she said to me, "Oh, we mourned. We were passing through the valley, but really there was another thing on our hearts, which was this. The miracles that had marked his life, will they continue? Will the miracles go on? Will God still lead us by his presence, his miraculous presence, as we continue the work, continue on the way we've been sent?" And that's when they found out, day by day, that God was still with them. Just like God promised to Israel, just like God promised to Abraham and to Moshe, I will be with you. I will see you again, Yeshua says. Your heart will rejoice. No one will take your joy from you. Your life, your promises, your hope, they will go on to fulfillment. We are to be confident in the resurrection. We should be confident in resurrection hope. Just as 1 Corinthians 15 says, the fact is that Messiah has been raised from the dead. He is the first fruits of those who have died. In other words, Paul looks out towards the celebration of Bikurim and the risen reality of Yeshua, and he sees them now as one event. The first fruits of the temple are now the first fruits of the resurrection. For since death came through a man, also the resurrection of the dead has come through a man. For just as in connection with Adam all die, so in connection with the Messiah, all will be made alive. And that's the promise. The fact is that Messiah has been raised from the dead. And indeed, we are alive, but each in his own order. The Messiah is the first fruits. And then those who belong to the Messiah at the time of his coming. And then the culmination when he hands over the kingdom to God the Father after having put an end to every rulership, yes, to every authority and power apart from God. But we know that this time is coming. We call the season which follows the counting of the Omer. But for Israel, what we are really doing is we're not just counting the days, the 49 days between the time when Israel left Egypt and the time they arrive at Sinai. And we are not simply counting the days between the time of the resurrection and the time when the Spirit will fall on the first believers. But rather, Israel is taking a time to reflect and say, if we are making this journey, how will we make it in such a way that it will be so meaningful? We're going through a journey right now too. I think we're on a journey between this time really of the most difficult, but really the darkest days of the pandemic. And we are walking our way through too. I believe the end of this journey, we will see the world transformed again. And we will have to figure out what our place is going to be in a new and changed world. That is what is going to be really our challenge. What will our place be in a new and changed world? The counting of the Omer is still well ahead of us. But let's remember to whom was the risen Yeshua revealed. In other words, the power of the resurrection, the hope of the resurrection, the motivation which drives us through such times as this, was revealed to the women at the tomb. It was not revealed to the most intimate of his disciples first, but rather the women at the tomb, to the disciples on the road to Emmaus. In fact, we know that one of those disciples was Yeshua's uncle, a relatively minor figure, and another relatively minor disciple. And yet Yeshua walked with them even on their journey, not knowing what they had left behind. Yeshua was with them, rushing away from Jerusalem. He certainly knew what was yet to come. We know that he revealed himself to the disciples at numerous occasions in Jerusalem and Galilee. He appeared to his brother Yaakov, the one we call James, and he also, as it were, seemed to appear before a gathering of 500, according to the Apostle Paul, Rav Shaul. There are remarkable aspects about this resurrection, a mystery that inspires hearts and wonders, as the one of the great 19th century scholars, Lord Westcott, said, feeling and thought need to be purified and enlightened that he may be known. In other words, people couldn't know who he was, but rather to see and know who he was itself a challenge. As it says, what was natural was now miraculous. Yeshua ate, he spoke, he was able to be held, even though he had, he had died. But what was miraculous had become natural to him. He appeared at his will. He came through locked doors. He was seen but not known. Most of all, we are given a heavenly insight into the heavenly body, which is the model of the body we will receive in heaven. As he was being called out of the world, though, his disciples are now being called to take his place. And that's what is most significant to us. Not just the promise of the resurrection, but what resurrection, hope, and power can now do for us. He changed his disciples and all who follow him to bring his message into the world. He was leaving the gospel message in our hands, but he was not leaving us alone. He was not leaving us without power. He gave us this promise. Lord, are you restoring the kingdom to Israel this time? And he said to them, it is not your place to know the times or seasons which the Father has placed under his own control, but you will receive power. And the Ruach HaKodesh has come upon you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, through all Judea and Samaria, and to the end of the world. You will receive power. And our task goes on as we wrap up our study tonight. Think of these words, Philippians chapter 3. My aim is to know him and the power of his resurrection, in sharing of his sufferings, becoming like him in his death, if somehow I might arrive at the resurrection from among the dead. Not that we have already obtained this or been perfected, but I press on. I press on. What began with Passover, what began with Abraham, what began with my first steps, what began with my decisions to go forward, what began before now presses on into the future, that I might take hold of that for which Messiah Yeshua took hold of me. I can do what Yeshua took hold of me to fulfill with my unique gifts, my unique heart, my unique spirit, my unique network, my unique circle of friends and family. He took hold of me, forgetting what is behind and straining toward what is ahead. I press on toward the goal for the reward of the upward calling of God and Messiah Yeshua. I don't think there's any more powerful word than that. I press on toward the goal. This past week, we were talking about marathon runners. And it's an amazing thing to reach that point. Marathon runners reach a certain point where it seems like they have completely run out of fuel. They don't have another thing left in them. They reach that point. But if they push through, they break through, they get to the other side, and a whole new level of strength comes. And they train for that. They train for that moment. I was hearing about a couple, and the couple are very, very different. One was a marathon. One had turned to become a marathon runner. The other one was a great encourager. And she had reached a certain point in the New York City Marathon, and she was standing there, and she called her boyfriend at the time. She called her and said, "I can't do it anymore." And he said to her, "You've trained for this. You've got this. You know you have to do it." And she pressed on. This past week they got married, and they remembered that moment. I press on. I know that there are barriers. I know that there are so many obstacles. I know that there are so many reasons, so many challenges, so many disappointments. But I press on toward the goal for the reward of the upward calling, the reward of those who are pressing not just on toward over the hill, but toward our Messiah, toward our upward calling of God in Him. My friends, may the Lord lead you to that place which He has purposed fully for you. In Yeshua's name, amen and amen.